How's it going, everyone? Nick from Comic Culture here. It's time for Nick at Night, my weekly non-spoiler comic book review show. Just got done reading all of my books. Let's get into them right now. We're going to go ahead and put the grading bar up. Whenever I go over a book, I'm going to put the cover on that grading bar so you know how they stack up against each other. So let's get into it real quick with some DC books first. We have Poison Ivy issue number 7 with that amazing, gorgeous Middleton cover written by G. Willow Wilson. We have a new artist on here. Ilhan, I believe is how you pronounce that last name. Still can draw like foliage and some gnarly Poison Ivy kind of scenes and panels and things like that. Things we were used to on the previous run. So I'll give him credit for that. Faces are a little bit weird, but you know, it grew on me as I was reading the issue. Here's a little bit of that interior artwork, but essentially what Poison Ivy's up to right now, we just took out Woodrow, so we're on the next stage right now. She's trying to infiltrate this big corporation right now because they're actually polluting the environment, and she's finding some of those weird like Swamp Thing-esque monsters that we encountered in the first run, and so we're trying to explore what the heck is going on right now, what kind of things they're doing to the environment to create these things, or are they just leftover remnants of the previous arc? So we're trying to figure that out right now. So we're infiltrating this big corporation, and we actually run into someone from Poison Ivy's past as well in this book. So it's pretty interesting. Again, the artist on here does a pretty good job drawing out some real gnarly stuff. And so we get to see this kind of play through. And so if you liked the theme of the last issue, or the last run rather, we continue it in here. The art style is pretty close. It's pretty similar. And we're just doing a lot more of what we were uncovering in the first round. So pretty interesting book. I think if you like the first 6, you're going to dig this one as well. Even with the artist changed, like I said, they kind of keep that vibe going. So Poison Ivy number 7, still a pretty decent read. Next DC book is Sword of Azrael. This is issue number 5 of 6 from Dan Waters. What a great book this is. I never was really into Azrael kind of growing up or when I was getting into comics. And so I was introduced to Azrael through that latest Gotham City, Arkham City, Gotham Knights, whatever that was a little while ago. And also Ram V brought in Father Valley in here, who's also inside of this book. And so what's going on here, we're actually just 2 issues away from this story ending in the 6th issue. So this is the penultimate edition. And so we're just looking at this now and I'm like, how are they going to wrap up this story with so little time left in here? Well, we do get a lot of Father Valley and our Azrael character just trying to figure out where to go from here. Azrael's kind of fallen from grace right now. He realizes now that his creators, his makers, created him for this really weird, twisted way to kind of like push their agenda, right? His origin story wasn't what he thought it was. So he's thinking, you know, I'm going to kind of hang it up right now. But with a little push from Father Valley, he kind of gets back into the swing of things in here. And there's some amazing artwork in this book right here. I'm not going to call the style anime-ish, but like that's really the only way I can kind of think of it. There's a lot of kinetic paneling in here, and there's some expressions and things like that you might see in some of your anime shows. And so that's why I'm kind of calling it that style. But there's a lot of time to like breathe between the moments as well, which is pretty fun. You can see the buildup throughout this issue. We actually touch base with the female character we were introduced to way back in like issue 1 and 2, who we really haven't seen since then. And we get to see her upgrades, where she's at right now. And she's essentially another Azrael in her own right. So it's going to be fun to see these guys battling it out here pretty soon. And then we got Vengeance in the background too, just kind of hanging out in the shadows, not really knowing what's going on. So very cool book. I like the build up for this one. I feel like 6 issues is just not enough to tell this story. We had this weird like 2.5 issue interruption in this main story we were introduced to. I feel like if this was 8, maybe 12 issues, we really could have like flushed all these things out. Still a really cool run. It's one of my only Azrael books I've ever read, but I'm really digging it. Check this one out. Batman 130, that fail-safe arc coming to a closure. Chip Zdarsky on this book with Jorge Ramirez, and we have Mori on here as well. First off, look how awesome this cover is. We have Batman essentially on Earth right now in some kind of snowy environment, walking away. He's beat the hell up, and we have Failsafe closing in to deliver that final death blow on there. So really awesome stuff happening in here. Somehow we get back to Earth. It's a pretty crazy trip. We're in this space station right now, and Failsafe is just on this relentless hunt towards Batman. Failsafe is essentially the backup plan to take out Batman, like the Omega Protocol for Batman that Batman set up. We had some really cool deep cuts that Chip Zdarsky brought in with another form of Batman. It was really awesome. Now we are back on Earth. We're trying to gathered the ranks back together, getting some Superman, getting some Tim Drake action in here too. Really cool scenes in here. And it's just like the most Batman thing you'll ever read. It is extremely over the top. So if you're into like a more realistic Batman, this ain't the book for you. If you're into that no holds barred, I don't care what happens, give me the most Batman story ever, this book is for you. So I would highly recommend checking it out, especially if you're in the Chip style. He's doing his best Donny Cates impersonation that I can think of. And it is so badass. He's just got such a cool artist on here too with Jorge Mendez. It's just beautiful, man. Beautiful. I'm loving everything about this. It was just fun. It was over the top. It was crazy. It was unbelievable. Of course, it was Batman. And that's what we need. That's what we got. Check this book out. It's awesome. Fantastic Four issue number 2. Not a bad read. It's very similar to issue number 1, although this one is focusing more on Sue and Reed. And so we basically have the same kind of premise, though. They're on their own right now. Very similar to the first issue when Ben was out with his wife and they were in this kind of like Groundhog's Day scenario. This is with Reed and Sue, and they're in a very similar situation. They're in another town, but they're actually noticing that the town is actually overrun by doom bots, and there's a whole reason why. And it's a really kind of sweet, beautiful story behind the reasoning why, but it's like got its own little sadistic twist to it as well. So very cool. It's very, very localized. There's not a lot of other things going on. There's no other heroes or other members of the Fantastic Four. It looks like we're going to get these kinds of isolated stories instead of like a big group kind of an event thing. And I'm kind of down for that. It kind of, brings it back down to earth a little bit, figuratively speaking. And yeah, it's pretty cool. And if you've been watching me for any amount of time, you know that I like paneling that has a lot of different things going on in it. I like the backgrounds being used in a clever way. I like a good colorist, and I like just some realistic faces and things like that. And this book did a pretty good job of doing that. Like, these panels are cram-packed. They really could have been lazy and, put in some solid backgrounds or whatever, but there's actually a lot of stuff happening in some of these panels with some of these battles and things like that. And they're pretty creative with their power sets, which I think is interesting, especially when you have the Fantastic Four, because they're such cool characters. Sue Storm's awesome in here. Reed's doing some cool stuff. And like I said, it's very much like issue number 1, just with different characters in a different setting, still in a small town, trying to figure things out. Pretty interesting. And those Alex Ross covers are fire, and I can't wait to get the Johnny Storm one when it comes out next month. So it's a pretty decent book to check it out. Then we got Miles Morales, Spider-Man issue number 1 from Ziegler. You know what? I'm admittedly don't know much about Miles Morales. I played some of the games here and there and read some of the books where he was like an ancillary character. I think he was like the main thing in Civil War II, like one of the main characters that they used in Civil War II. Anyways, but it's been a long time since I've read like a decent thing from Miles Morales. And so I was excited to get into this book because it's a decent place to jump in. It's a number 1, so it's a complete sales gimmick, and I fell for it and everything. It's Legacy 283, but come on, that cover art is fire. And I flipped through the pages when I was at the shop, and I was really impressed by the art in here too. I'll give you a taste of what that looks like. We have Scorpion coming in early in this issue, just kind of wrecking the day. And we get introduced to this young girl on the one panel there who's just kind of like being seen as a decent person going out of their way to help people. And then, of course, we get introduced to our Miles character, and they're going through the regular stuff that we see these characters go through, right? They're struggling in school. They have a couple close friends. Their parents are worried about them. They're so stressed out. They got a lot of stuff going on, and they just don't know how they're going to juggle it all. And they got to save the day at the same time. So it's like, it's a typical story. Nothing really creative from that perspective. We see that story over and over and over and over again. And so I don't really know how else you do a number 1, I suppose. But if you don't know much about Miles Morales, this is a great book to jump in on, because we get introduced to him, his family, some of his friends. They go over his power set, and he's taking on a familiar rogues gallery in this one too. And then the ending is interesting. Miles actually has, some kind of a stalker right now. And so we're going to figure out what that means going forward. But again, man, just the art style in here is just so killer. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. So that really, really kept my attention throughout this whole book. Not a bad number 1, very predictable, standard story, but drawn really well, and it's a good place to jump in if you're not familiar with Miles. Check it out. All right, jumping over to Jason Aaron's Punisher. This is issue number, what is this, 8, with that amazing Gunsmoke Punisher symbol on there. I love that cover, so cool, and it's not as banged up as normal Marvel books are, you know what I mean? These black covers are really hard to get in decent shape, although you see that rippling in there for sure. You're never going to get rid of that in Marvel books. But yeah, Punisher is actually a really fun read if you can get over what's really going on with the Punisher right now. Are they retconning some of his history? I don't know yet. Honestly, I really don't know. Maybe they can flip it all around and kind of make it this illusion that they've been dealing with this whole time. There's a lot of weird resurrection stuff happening right now with the Hand. We have Ares, the god of war, and his army marching on the doorsteps right now. And Punisher's not turning down or, turning around and hiding from him. So it's really fun to see him prepare for battle in this issue. And one of the fun things about this run is seeing Punisher, seeing Frank Castle kind of embrace the madness a little bit. He's becoming the Beast, and there's these different signs, these different power sets that will manifest over time once you kind of give in to the system. And we're pretty much leveled up at this point. And the High Priestess or whoever it is can recognize that in him and recognizes not only the powers that he kind of can manifest, but also his attitude towards the system as well. So it's really fun to see that maturity and see that growth from there. And then it's awesome to see what's happening with Ares towards the end here. Punisher's not turning down a chance to fight him, and it's going to get really crazy pretty soon. So I'm really looking forward to that conclusion there. Punisher, really cool run. I like the evolution of it. I'm just buying the story right now for what it is at face value. And so some people are mad about that, but I don't really care about it too much. I think it's a fun read. I'd recommend it. We're going back over to Chip Zdarsky on Daredevil issue number 6 with that awesome Elektra cover, kind of stabbing right through Tony Stark's Iron Man helmet right there, which is a little bit of a foreshadowing for sure in here, because there is a moment where Tony and Elektra kind of throw down in here, and it is a really fun battle to see for sure. They got on Tony's radar because they were raiding some high security prison, trying to get some guys to escape, some evil guys to escape to kind of join their cause. And there's a couple double motives going on in this book that we explore throughout the issue as well. So they've really got on Tony's radar, and so here we are, Tony kind of coming in to try to prevent Elektra from getting a hold of somebody very important. So it's a pretty interesting battle, to say the least. Then, of course, throughout the book, we actually do touch base with where the Fist training camp is, where Stick and Daredevil are kind of running things right now, and they're going through the ranks, they're going through the different people they rescued from that high security prison, and we get to understand some of their backgrounds and some of their power sets, things like that. And of course, we do get a little bit of a touch base moment with Goldie, who was introduced a few issues ago, and he really kind of messed up Matt a lot with what happened in those previous issues. So pretty cool book. I want to say not a whole lot goes on in here. Some cool stuff happens, but not a whole lot happens in here. It might be just kind of a supplementary book to kind of fill in some of the lore and some of the story a little bit and kind of show the readers where we're going. But it's drawn well, it's written well. It's kind of one of the slower issues, even though it has its moments. But yeah, Chip Zdarsky on Daredevil, it's been really fun, and I like Devil's Reign as well, so I would recommend checking this one out. The next book we read was Thor issue number 29 from Groenbeck, and we have Klein back on the art. I'm really loving Thor when Klein's writing this one. Kate's not on the credits for this book, and it's perfectly okay because we had a lot of stuff set up from Cates over the last 28 issues. He touched on so many things, introduced a few concepts, a few moments of foreshadowing, and then essentially abandoned those plot lines. And so now it's going to give potentially the next writers some time to develop those and to kind of pull those stories to their conclusion. And, that's definitely what we're doing in this first little introduction here. We have Corvus, one of the children of Thanos, going through and trying to get a hold of a very, very powerful artifact. And there's a very interesting way and a very personal way to Thor, way to actually accomplish this. So Thor actually has to get back with some allies and travel into some very, very dangerous lands to catch up with them and prevent them from obtaining this artifact that's going to bring doom to the land, of course, right? There's some interesting lore and some family dynamics going on in this book as well. We get introduced to another character we haven't seen, or I haven't seen in quite a long time. So it's chock full of interesting moments. It's starting to bring back some of the old stuff that Cates introduced in some of the runs that he did earlier on. some of the issues he did earlier on, so I'm excited to see where it goes from there. Again, Nick Klein's on the art, absolutely slaying it from that perspective. Interesting. So if you've been on Donny Cates' stuff and you've been kind of losing interest a little bit, I would try this one and see if this is a little bit more interesting to you and seeing if it's going to go in a direction that's going to be worth it at the end. Check this one out. Give it a shot. The next book we read was Variants issue number 5 from Gail Simone, and we have Phil Noto on the art as well. So it's been a minute since I've read Variants, and I didn't quite know where we left off. I remember the basic premise, right? It was like the anniversary of the Purple Man coming up when he actually was starting to mess around with Jessica Jones, and she was warned from a previous victim that, hey, on this 10th anniversary or whatever it is, something's going to happen to you mentally, so you have to really prepare for this. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of variants showed up of her, right? We have all these different versions of Jessica Jones just kind of popping in, and there's all this chaos and confusion after that. And this is like a kind of like a battle issue or like a reason why we're here to take you out kind of a thing, because they all seem to be after her for some reason. I just didn't quite connect all the dots between the initial problem with Purple Man and then all these variants showing up. I just can't remember the reason why that's even happening. But alas, at the end of the day, they are able to control and take care of business over here. So overall, I mean, this is a pass for me, honestly. Phil Noto's art is really cool. And here, the story started really interesting, and then it took this really weird turn. And for the life of me, I cannot connect it and put it together, like why that actually happened. If you know and remember, please put it down in the comments, because it's been so long since I feel like I've read issue number 4. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Not a great read. Trade read if you're into Jessica Jones, I would say. I would check it out on a trade, not a single issue. We're going to dip in some independent books real quick. We have Night of the Ghoul issue number 3 from Scott Snyder and Francisco Francavilla. Interesting book. It's thick. It reads very, very quickly, though, and this is definitely a cool conclusion to the story here that we've been building over the last couple of issues. First thing I want to mention is the creepy art style in here. It's dramatic. It's nuts. Lots of close-up of shocked faces, interesting coloring, all that good stuff. The stuff that you would expect to see inside of a horror ghoul kind of a book here. Also has some twists and turns in here, too. The story that we've been told might not necessarily be the story that's actually taking place in here. We get to see all that unfold as we go through this book. And there's a really interesting commonality between the movie Night of the Ghoul and what's actually taking place in real life, in real time. And they do a great job kind of flipping back and forth between that. And you know when they're doing that because the whole art style changes, the color tones and everything like that. It is horrific. Lots of cool things going on. There's about demons and worship and everything like that. And some opposing forces that are going to take on this ghoul. It's just a really interesting read. It is thick. It's a little bit intimidating at first, but it reads so quickly because Scott Snyder is so good at writing those stories, and you just consume it very, very quickly. So I'd say if you're still in the mood to read something ghoulish, pick up these 3 issues, go on Comixology, go ahead and check it out. I think it's worth it from that perspective. And again, it's Scott Snyder. He does a really good job of just telling stories and things like that. So I would give this one a shot. It's got great art as well. It's pretty interesting. I'd check it out. Okay, Scott Snyder and Tony S. Daniel on Nocterra Val special. This book was incredible. Probably one of my favorite issues of Nocterra in quite some time, because it's actually a little bit of a storytelling about how the ferrymen came to be. Now, if you remember the very first issue of Nocterra, there's basically this transportation units, these different people that would move people from base to base, right? Station to station, and they were called ferrymen, and it's actually a play on the old ferrymen in the River of Styx and things like that. So they kind of take on that name, and Val is kind of one of those people, or she rolls with those people at least, right? So that's how we were originally introduced to Val that way. But this is actually the story of how she came to that, how some of her mentors that she met along the way. And it also talks about some of the different stations out there that used to exist. And it tells a big story about dangerous people and second chances and things like that. It's very, very graphic. And it does tell a really compelling, interesting story. And you feel for the characters in here. And so it's a really, really fun read. I'll give you a sample of what that art looks like inside. Again, it's absolutely nuts and beautiful. They do a great job of showing off all the different colors and things like that and making things pop and it's a really, really fun read. So if you're a fan at all of Noctera, you really have to check this one out because I think it's one of the best issues out there. And I think it's just like this one shot, right? This Val special. And I need to figure out if they're going to continue Noctera going forward because the way that they ended the regular issue run was kind of ambiguous, and I really want this to pick back up. This was a great issue. Check this one out. All right, as if we didn't talk about Scott Snyder enough, him and Hayden Sherman are putting out Dark Spaces Wildfire issue number 5. Got that Andrea Sorrentino variant, which is the B variant here. So this is the conclusion of the story, and in Scott Snyder fashion, he likes to put little twists and turns at the end. This time it was introduced in issue number 4, plays out in issue number 5, and it's okay. It's okay. It didn't quite grip me, I think, the way that I wanted it to. It was an interesting premise, though. Interesting premise, executed fairly well. I like Hayden Sherman's art style in some other books, like Above Snake. This one was okay. This one was probably my least favorite that I've seen of him. I'm just not a big fan of his characterizations in this one. The environments and the housing and the fire and the landscape shots were all really fun, but it seemed like every time we saw some of the characters in close-up form, I just didn't know who they were. And sometimes they were just a little bit oddly drawn, I thought. So, a fan of Hayden Sherman most times, just not necessarily in this book here. Again, Above Snakes, I absolutely loved that style in there. Again, Scott Snyder storytelling, cool premise, interesting characters, lots of good motivation. There's always going to be a twist at the end, it seems. This one didn't quite hit the mark for me, but it was still a fun story. I would say it's a trade read for sure. I would check it out if you wanted to read it. All right, Boom Studios, Know Your Station, issue number 1 from Sarah Gailey and Leanna Kangas with Rebecca Nolte. So, Know Your Station, I got it because of the good old station, everybody. I wanted to check this one out, a Boom number 1. So, I wanted to go ahead and check this out. I did flip through it. It sounded like, or it looked like anyway, it was going to be just one hell of a read. I was like, man, who's writing this stuff? There's so much going on in here. It's almost like a novel. But it actually reads fairly quickly. Basically, we do have this character here. We're on this like space station. It's a really weird like dystopian utopia in a way. They're in these space stations. We have this essentially drug addicted female on here who's actually interacting with like her own personal AI. And she goes on these like detective missions and she finds lost goods or she investigates murders with some other people, some higher up ranked people. And she ends up getting into a situation where she might be framed for murder. So it's a pretty interesting little story. It didn't quite grip me. There's definitely moments of humor and levity, and that was kind of fun. But, you know, maybe it was something about the art. It is interesting, but I don't know. It just didn't completely grip me. I feel like I didn't quite connect with the characters. They had some weird motives and were acting kind of strange. But I don't know. It was an okay first issue. We're definitely in a jam in here, so there is an interesting cliffhanger and hook. But I kind of just felt confused about who this girl was and what her role was and, you know, what kind of authority does she have? Because that was kind of ambiguous, and I didn't quite understand exactly what was going on. And so I think that kind of layered on top of the art a little bit for me. I didn't quite enjoy that. So I would say this is kind of a pass, but let me know if you read it and what your thoughts were. All right, the next couple books are going to be digital reads that I got this week because I wasn't able to get the physical copies, but we have Do a Powerbomb issue number 7 from Daniel Warren Johnson and Mike Spicer, the conclusion to one of the best books I've read in a long time. Such a great issue. And basically we have our tag team champion team here taking on God himself in this handicap match for all the marbles, right? Who knew God was a gigantic wrestling fan? So we're going to get into this. It's so much action inside of this issue. It is extremely heartfelt. It's not exactly the ending we were hoping for, but it was the ending that we needed and deserved, right? So it's very, very high paced, just an amazing overall story that again gives you what you need, not what you think you need. This book will blow you away from the visuals. It will blow you away from the storytelling, and it will hit you in the feels for sure. I would highly recommend this one. It's a great, great run. Get it in trades if you haven't gotten it in single issues. Just enjoy it, sit back, enjoy the chaos, embrace the story. It's worth it. Check it out. All right, the next digital read this week was Dynamite's Gargoyles, issue number 1 from Greg Weisman. Hopefully you can see that coming through. It was an okay issue. It was definitely a catch-up issue. They're acting like we don't remember anything from the show or anything like that, so it is a good opportunity if you've never been into Gargoyles to get into it and get reintroduced to the characters or introduced to the characters and some of their relationships and, you know, some of the main humans that they interact with as well. They do go over a little bit of an origin story just briefly on the Gargoyles themselves, like how'd they get there? You know, how long have they been around? What are some of the powers and things like that? What are some of the other ancillary characters? So they do give you a little touch base and all that stuff. So it is a good place to jump in, or it's just a good place to come in if you haven't seen it in 12 years and just need a little refresher. So that's where we are right now with Gargoyles #1. Not a whole lot going on. A little bit of a hook at the very end to, you know, get you interested in seeing what's happening in the story in the next couple of issues. But other than that, not a whole lot of stuff going on. It does have that classic art style though. So if you are familiar with the books or the cartoon, I think you're going to enjoy that, and it's somewhat familiar. So that is pretty cool. They kind of kept that style, which I think they need to. So Gargoyles, nothing impressive, a big reintroduction issue. So if you're into that kind of stuff, maybe check it out. So that will about do it for this week. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please go down and hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. As a reminder, I not only put out content here on YouTube, but also Instagram. Links will be down below in the description. But as always, I appreciate you watching the video. I'll see you down below in the comments.